All right, everybody, welcome back for another exhilarating episode of What Screams May Come, the place where you can find your next favorite authors through their stories and a sample of their stories as well, if you guys stick around to the end. Here today with award-winning, prolific author Philip Fracassi. How you doing, Phil?
Good. Thank you, Rick. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, no, really appreciate this. So it was, super cool being able to meet you at the author con not too long ago. It seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't long ago in
Yeah.
Williamsburg, Virginia. So that was a good time, man. So yeah, no, really appreciate being here as well. And obviously, the big thing that's kind of brought us together today is the your next upcoming book called The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, which is a mouthful, but there's a lot going on in the book. And, without wasting too much time, as I kind of mentioned to you off cam, Philip, as somebody that I do currently work in a long term care facility. So I kind of have to ask if you, you know, if you set out to write the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre just because you happen to not like old people, or if there's maybe other motivating factors that, fueled that story for you initially when you set out to write it.
No, I mean quite the opposite. I think the characters in the story in the book are actually that they have a lot of depth and they have a lot of uh, desires and they're very fleshed out and they're my lead character Rose Dubois is incredibly smart and tenacious, and so no, I have throughout the one of the themes of the book is actually about respecting the elderly and our elderly generations and the folks like that and how we treat them and how they're treated and so that's one of the big themes of underlying themes of the book, which is that at its top level, it is definitely a slasher. So a
Yeah.
lot of folks definitely do get do get killed in horrific ways. So there's that element. But no, I the idea for the book came not at all really nothing to do with a retirement home as much as it did. My wife and I were in Virginia. Speaking of Virginia, and
Yeah.
we were there doing. I was touring for Boys in the Valley. This was in the fall of 2023, and we were at this Marriott, and it was sort of at the top of this hill, and there was
Yeah.
like three or four like old brick buildings and beautiful green rolling hills surrounding the area. And as we were taking like a evening stroll around this campus, um, I kind of made the comment like, "Boy, this really seems more like a retirement home than a hotel," and it just for whatever reason, it just kind of clicked, and I started thinking about, well, then what if this was retirement home? Maybe I could set the story here, and what would be a cool story? And I was kind of,
Okay.
oh, what if it was a slasher? That'd be kind of fun. And the next morning, I sent my agent a one-page summary called "The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre," kind of saying this is my next idea, and she loved it, and that became this.
Nice.
2 years later, yeah.
Fantastic. And the really cool thing too is, and that's great that you like with all of your stories, you put such a touch of humanity in them that no matter the supernatural, horrific elements, maybe stuff that takes place, historically, as you did with Serafina, they're so relatable, and that's really cool that you do, make sure that you put your signature Fracassi style of humanizing these characters so well. But on an Instagram post, I thought it was really that I read of yours recently. It was really cool that you did talk about how this story was, in particularly, very personal to you. Assuming that you don't have any direct run-ins with any serial killers, uh, how might where does that personal aspect of it? What part of the book did you find was you getting get in touch with more of your personal stuff?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I exactly said that, but in the afterword I do address it, which is just basically like I just mentioned, I came up with this idea, I sent it to my agent, and then literally 3 days later, give or take, I was in New York City. I was continuing the tour, and I pitched my editor at Tour the idea, and she loved it, and she was like, yeah, you should definitely write that. And when I pitched it to her, I pitched it as I kind of saw the book being more of a dark comedy with very ultra violence thrown in, and I hadn't really gotten too into it. Like, like I said, I just came up with the idea, and so I was just kind of beginning to imagine set pieces and how it would work and who the characters might be. And but when I pitched it, like I said, I thought of it more as kind of being a little bit lighter and a little bit more of a fun slasher, which I had never really written one of those. And but then from that point of me pitching it to my editor, and during the entire writing process of the book, I lost both of my parents. Both my parents passed away. My father,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. My father suffered from dementia, and I had to take care of him for a couple months in Detroit. And then very shortly after he passed, my mother had heart complications, and she passed away. And there was a lot of there, that happened to me in that period of time, and not just the emotions of it and the loss and the hardships of it, but also the conversations that I had with my father when he was suffering from dementia, and the things that he would say, and the struggles that we had with the hospice care, and then when my mother was sick, and the struggles we had with insurance, and where was she going to go, and could we, what options did she have? And so I was really immersed in all of this kind of, end of life, conversations. And so a lot of that went into the book because, it was so impactful to me, and opened my eyes to a lot of what will happen to everybody. We're all, we all are hopefully going to live long enough to get old and get infirm, and we have to make those decisions. And how do you organize the last years of your life, and what do you want that to look like, and how does that affect your family, and all that kind of stuff. And then also the idea of caring for someone who is very sick. And so all of that stuff ended up in the book, and the book became thematically much heavier and much more intense and in depth than I had originally anticipated. It's still definitely a slasher, and it's still definitely like pure adrenaline fueled entertainment. And there's definitely still some comedic moments, absolutely some dark comedic moments, but it's also got this real beating heart to it now because of what I was going through while I was writing it.
Oh, that's amazing. And certainly as somebody that I've certainly seen that quite a bit of that, at least secondhand through my experience of working for the long-term care center. Actually, for the first 8 months, I worked in our only lockdown residential section, where every resident there was advanced dementia and also ecstasy seeking, which is why it was locked down, so they couldn't run off and get all sorts of issues there. So, but yeah, that's very cool that you, if that's a way to put it, that you decided to really tackle that part of it, because I think that doing that, certainly in the style that you've tackled other, difficult human turmoil aspects of your stories, I could see that as being really cathartic for somebody, because certainly, even as much as I've seen families going through that, going through that stuff, the business end of dying, and the obviously very emotional part of it, as much as you try to put yourself in those shoes, you just don't know what it's like until you're faced with it. So it's great that you're able to translate your experience into part of the book. And the cool thing about this too is you mentioned you're one of your main, if not your main character in this, of course, Rose Dubois. Is it Dubois? Dubois, thank you.
Yeah.
You say much better than I do. So Dubois, you kind of talk a little bit it's in the description of the synopsis. So I cheated on this next question a little bit, because you do mention her as being not your average final girl.
Right.
And we all, you get to a certain point, you've seen so many of the final girls, you kind of have an idea of what to expect from them. There's certainly a spectrum that we think they all fit into. Right. So when you look at a final girl, what is it about Rose, other than the fact that she is in her twilight years? I think it mentions that she's in her 70s, I believe. Yeah. What is about her that makes her not the average final girl?
Well, I think that marketing copy is what it is, and I think the idea is that it's not a trope from a trope perspective. It's not your average final girl, and you don't often have a
Gotcha.
final girl that's in her late 70s,
Yeah.
and you don't think, but you don't have a slasher set in a retirement home. So
Right.
so in that sense, Rose is very much the central figure of the story. She is very much the one who is kind of playing the sleuth in the story. The story, in addition to being a slasher and all the other things that I mentioned, thematically intense and having the dark comedic moments and all that stuff and the ultra violence, which it does have. There's also a whodunit aspect to it because you don't know
Hmm.
who's behind these killings, and
Yeah.
so Rose and her friends, are very, kind of integrate themselves into the mystery of it. And there's even more stuff. And I think the chapter I'll read later actually plays into this a little bit, which
Okay.
is that, how seriously do like the local detectives take the fact that elderly people at a retirement home are dying,
Right.
and the way the killer is um, dispatching of people leaves an ambiguity to whether they were killed or whether they died by an accident or otherwise. So
Right.
so that's a lot of what is going on at play. But yeah, but Rose is an amazing character. She is not. I would say she's not your average final girl in the sense that she also in addition to her age being kind of like unique. But final girls a lot of times are sort of like the outcast, kind of almost like they're sort of
Yeah.
like they're the ones who kind of like don't fit into the group or whatever. And
Yeah.
whereas Rose is sort of very much like at the center of everything and very
Yeah.
integrated in the community. So I don't know. I think the way she deals with the killer or killers or whoever, I'm not, I'll keep it super vague. Um, I think that I think when you read the book, you'll get a really strong sense of what she has had to go through to get to this point of her life, and you learn a lot about Rose's past during the course of the story and how it plays into what's happening to her in the
Right.
present. So there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of
Yeah.
moving pieces, a lot of characters in this book, and but yeah, I think the mystery and the the slasher aspect of it and the whodunit aspect of it, I think people will have a lot of fun trying to figure out what exactly is going on at Autumn Springs.
Perfect. And I love the fact that most of your, uh, if I were to pin any sort of style on you, it's that you do a lot of your or most of your story writing, anyways, from a very layered approach, where you've got all this kind of like a melting pot of all these different tropes. And I do want to talk to you a little bit about that in a second. But before I do, just to touch one last thing on Rose, and really all the characters are within this retirement home. You mentioned before, when I thought was fascinating, that rather than like a lot of folks, a lot of writers that I talk to do, where you've got your setting first, and then the story kind of comes out of that. It sounds like you kind of had the story, and then you decided maybe later on in that the blossoming aspect or the outlining aspect of that story that to set it into this retirement home. So it made me curious to ask you, were there any advantages to the storytelling that was given to you because of the setting versus maybe any of the disadvantages and restrictions that you had to be aware of that you maybe couldn't get away or be as free with because it was of the setting?
Um, and I think just much like my novel Boys in the Valley, I think one of the advantages of setting the story in a place,
Yeah.
meaning frankly in a community, in a very tight community, is that it's a very contained story. So I think that's an advantage for me as a writer and also for the reader because
Sure.
the story is very contained. 95% of this book takes place at the retirement home.
Yeah.
So there's not versus like my novel, A Child Alone with Strangers, which is
Mhm.
all over the place, different cities and all that kind of stuff until it all kind of condenses.
Sure.
Um, this, much like Boys in the Valley, this whole story takes place basically, like I said, with the exception of maybe one or two chapters, all takes place in the retirement home. So I like that because I think I like the idea of really immersing the reader um, in this community, really giving the reader a sense of the place, a sense of the characters there, and and a lot of the early reviewers have even commented, which makes me very happy,
Yeah.
that like they definitely felt like they were part of this community, that they knew these people, that they had, felt very much like they were at this facility,
Yeah.
this campus, as it were. And so I think that's one of the advantages of doing a mystery or a slasher type, a horror story kind of setup in a contained situation, much like the movie The Thing or Alien and all that good stuff. Is you can kind of really focus on that one thing and focus on the characters there, and really drill deeper into the ground of that place, versus like having to
Right.
kind of overly explain. Unlike Boys in the Valley, which
Yeah.
had literally 30 plus characters, all the boys, all the priests, and everything having to, there's a lot to keep track of.
Sure. Some of the neighbors and
Yeah. Whereas I think with the retirement home, even though there are 80 plus people who live here, and there's nurses and doctors and what have you, and
yeah.
administrators and detectives, and there are a lot of characters and stuff, but I really tried to keep the focus on a small group of characters, so that and the perspectives from a small group of characters, so that the reader got really comfortable with those voices and got comfortable with those characters, and I think hopefully will add to the immersion um, of the story when they start when they start reading the book.
Yeah, and I've no doubt that you're going to pull that off as well, because I know, like you mentioned, in Boys in the Valley, there's numerous people, and you know that because number one, it's a school, but also because you do get a pretty wide scope of perspectives from the core people that you actually tell the story through. So I think that pulled
Yeah,
off really well.
yeah. Much like Boys, there were 30 plus characters in this orphanage, but I only have five perspectives in the
Yeah,
book. So the book alternates between five different POVs. That's very similar to how I did it with Autumn Springs, which is your basic. Although I will say the difference is a majority of the a majority of the story is told through Rose's eyes.
okay.
So it's not quite as whereas in Boys in the Valley, I was I was switching pretty I was switching around quite a bit.
Right.
Um, in this story, it's really Rose's story,
Okay.
um, and so with certain chapters being different perspectives. But yeah,
Okay.
so that's the huge advantage. It's like when you can really focus and as a writer, as a storyteller, if you can really
Yeah.
focus on one specific contained area and make all the action happen in that space and make it work,
Yeah.
it's a lot more fun for me, because you can do a lot more with the
Yeah.
characters and really get into the nitty gritty of that setting.
Cool. And I mean, your enjoyment and passion in the storytelling too definitely shines through. And I love that too. Certainly as a reader, I find that when we spend a lot of time in that one place, I mean, even Serafina, I mean, really, it expands a lot of different areas, but in that one
Yeah,
particular location, I feel like I'm just as familiar with it as the characters that are there in that location in the story.
yeah,
And if I can touch back a little bit too, Philip, on kind of what I mentioned before, and as you mentioned about how you definitely love to put a lot of different tropes into a story, and it's funny because you wouldn't think that they work, but you make them work. Where you've got a slasher, you've got a whodunit story, you've got a kind of a thriller detective story, and you mentioned a bit of humor as well. Like you've got all this stuff that I mean, geez, a lot of people find it almost impossible to try to balance horror and humor, but you do so much more with it. So I'm curious when you look at or when you have that richly layered storytelling style to your work, what value would you? And this is kind of a double a bit of a two-part question, I suppose. But what value do you find that having that layered approach gives to you as a reader or as a writer, I should say, and what value do you think that also helps provide your readers with based on the feedback that they give you and what you intend for them to have?
yeah. I mean, I do write stories that have, the way you phrased it is pretty good, that have layers. And I've even made the comment that there are different ways to read some of my stories, or or even some short stories, like the like in a lot of ways you can. I kind of write the stories in ways that so you can read it if you want to read it as like a page turning thriller. You can read it that way. If you want to kind of like slow it down and kind of like get more into the nuts and bolts of what's happening, or maybe some of the themes of what's going on, you can read it that way. An example would be like my novel, The Third Rule of Time Travel, my science fiction novel, which is like if you wanted to dig into deeper into the science and the physics of the time travel aspects, or the scientific aspects of that story, and kind of really start, do like a down the rabbit hole kind of thing of how the time machine works, you could, or you could just read it as a straight thriller. If I wrote a story called Mandala, which is in my story collection, Behold the Void, and it's kind of like a thriller, but it's like a ghost story and a thriller, but like you can read that story a couple different ways, and you could read even the ending of that story, you could read it as one way, or you could read it as another way, depending on how much time you really want to spend thinking about it or digging down into it. But I do very much like I wrote a story once called Murder by Proxy, and which is in that No One Is Safe book, and it's a sci-fi story set in the future, but it's also a noir detective story. And what I love doing, I mashed together like 50s pulp detective story with like a future sci-fi story. So which was really fun for me because I kind of like the idea of the detective having kind of this kind of wisecracking, fedora wearing detective who kind of talks in this very old timey way, and you could kind of come right out of a Hammett book, but it's all set in like the future, and there's all this technology happening. So so I do enjoy slipstream or cross genre, however you want to phrase it, with my stories. I'm a big fan of at least trying to subvert expectations for readers. I try very hard with my books and stories to give the reader an experience that they haven't had before. Obviously, it's very hard to do because we all stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were. Sure. But I try, and that's what I shoot for. So I think I do that two ways. One is I think I do that by mixing genres a little bit, or mixing or having a dark comedy that has incredible violence, that also has like incredible heart. That's one way to do it. I did that a little bit with Boys in the Valley. I think a lot of people commented about how emotional they got reading that book.
Oh, 100%.
Where it's really a possession horror novel. But and then the other way is I also I very much, and I like movies that do this too, and I've read a couple of screenplays that do this. But I very much like it when movies, much like Barbarian, for example, is a great example, where you have a movie that you think is going to be one kind of movie and ends up turning it on its head halfway through. Now it's a complete. So you think it's a crime movie, and then it turns out to be like a horror film. And Child Alone with Strangers is kind of a little bit like that. It's really the first couple hundred pages of that book it's really a crime novel, and then the last 300, it's a 700 page book, and then the last like few hundred pages, it's like a full blown creature feature. So so that's really fun for me to do, and I do it for myself because it's more it excites me as a writer, and it keeps my blood flowing and keeps my excitement level up. And I also hopefully the idea is that the reader is experiencing something very unique, and something that, if nothing else, something they maybe weren't expecting. Sometimes that comes back to bite me a little bit, whereas I'll let people read my book and think like, oh, it's going to be about this, and they're very ready to read a book about that, and then like it ends up being something different, and I think sometimes it disappoints them in a way because they kind of just wanted what they thought they were getting. But I don't mind that, because I'd rather surprise somebody and excite somebody and subvert expectations, like I said, than just give them something that they've already read 100 times.
Why don't we turn the tables around a little bit? I understand that you've got something that you're going to tease us with and give us a bit of a sample from the new book coming up.
Yeah, I have. So I have an arc of Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre right here, and the actual book will be hardcover. Comes out September 30th. Perfect for Halloween. And I got to be honest with you. So I've read from this book a couple times, and I've read the same chapter, I think 3 times now in public, to different at AuthorCon and other things. But it's long, so I'm not going to read that chapter. I was I want to read a different chapter that I've never read before. So I don't. So I haven't practiced this. I didn't read it to my wife before I came on. So I've never. But it's a little shorter than the other one, which is a little bit longer. So so this is. Let me see if do I need to set it up? I think it's basically a chapter with Rose Dubois, who I mentioned, and she's in her condo at the retirement home, and she gets a visitor. So let me sit my water here, folks.
Perfect, you got it.
All right. Rose is pouring herself the first coffee of the day. She allows herself 3 cups, but nothing with caffeine after 2 o'clock, lest it affect her sleep. When there's a knock at the door, she sets her cup down, walks to within a few feet of the locked door, and stops. "Who is it?" she says, hating the dark strands of fear slithering like poisonous snakes through her mind, through her heart. Despite warm leggings, slippers, and her favorite cable knit sweater, the dark gray Patagonia that Sybil bought her for Christmas a few years back, she shivers. "I'm shaking," she realizes with a sense of unease. "Good Lord, when did I become so afraid?" "It's the police, ma'am. If you don't mind, we have a few questions." The voice is young and male. Rose goes closer to the door, presses her eye against the peephole, and sees a policeman looking back at her, a grim patience etched on his face. Rose pulls open the door. The man is alone, but Rose hears the unfamiliar sound of formal conversation from down the hall. She sticks her head out and peeks toward the lobby, where another officer is speaking to one of her neighbors. She turns her eyes back to the young man standing in front of her and feels a renewed surge of fear. "What's happened?" The officer, who looks to Rose like he should be taking classes in college instead of wearing a holstered sidearm, only sighs heavily as if tired of hearing the same question. "I'm not at liberty to offer any details, ma'am, but if I could ask you a few questions, we'd certainly appreciate your time." "Who's we?" Rose asks. The officer, who Rose notes has a name tag above his badge that reads Freeman, looks at her with confusion. "Ma'am? You keep saying we. I'd like to know who we is." Officer Freeman arches an eyebrow. "The police, ma'am. We means the police." "Did someone die?" "Ma'am, if I can just ask you a few questions, I can let you go on with your day." "Get on with your day, you mean?" Rose thinks, her agitation at the officer's attitude ruffling her feathers more and more with each passing second. But she only nods, crossing her arms over her thick sweater, wondering what new horror has occurred at Autumn Springs. "Go on," Rose says, thinking that if this young man rolls his eyes at her, she might just slap him across the face. "My coffee's getting cold." Officer Freeman's expression tightens, like a man who goes to pet a dog only to be met with a deep snarl and a flash of wet, sharp teeth. Rose spends the next few minutes telling the policeman her full name, how long she's been a resident, and informing him that no, she hasn't heard or seen anything unusual last night. When the officer closes his notebook, he offers a smile that chills her heart. "I appreciate your assistance, Miss Dubois. Are you going to tell me what's happened? Or are we old folks supposed to sit in our fear all morning until we find out?" Officer Freeman doesn't answer, but instead gives her a smile that reminds Rose of a serpent, then begins walking toward the next apartment. As he turns to go, however, she grips him firmly by the arm. "I'd like you to tell me what's going on, young man, and I'd ask you to wipe that smirk off your face while you do it." The officer's smile disappears, replaced by a face of impatience and impending violence, a distorted mask she'd seen her own husband wear more than once. "Let go of my arm, Miss Dubois." Rose releases her hand, but her gaze on his remains steady. For a moment, Rose doesn't think he'll answer, but then he softens, as if suddenly realizing he's supposed to be one of the good guys. "One of your neighbors died last night, okay?" he says, looking down the hall as if to make sure the other officer can't hear him. "But look, he wasn't even in this building, so there's nothing for you to worry about." "Who?" she asks, faces and names swirling through her mind like the balls in a bingo cage. She can almost picture the faces of her friends on each one, a dark hand reaching inside to pull another soul free. "Who was it, and how did he or she die?" "I'm not allowed to say, ma'am," Officer Freeman says quietly, dark eyes locked on Rose, his face creased with an annoyed frown. He takes a small step closer and lowers his voice. "But if I'm being honest, this is all a big waste of time, don't you think, Miss Dubois? I mean, people probably die here every other day. Am I right?" "As rain," the dark voice in her mind hisses, but Rose pushes it away. Officer Freeman takes a step back. "Have a nice day, ma'am," he says, a little more loudly now, standing in front of Rose wearing that serpent's smile, like a doorman waiting for a tip. Rose does not return the smile. Instead, she takes 2 steps backward into her apartment and slams the door in the man's face. The end.
I'm sold. That was fantastic. Thank you. Holy smokes, that's great, man. Rose was one sharp, tough cookie.
She's a tough cookie.
Yeah. I like that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And this is going to be available, you mentioned, just in time for Halloween, September 30th.
September 30th, yes. Yeah, so, it's up for pre-order right now. It's actually coming out from, I don't have a physical copy of the UK edition, but it's coming out in the US from Tor Nightfire, and for folks who are listening from the UK or UK Commonwealth countries, it's coming out from Orbit in the UK. And it actually has a really cool, very different alternate cover for the UK edition. It's a little more comical, I guess. A little more farcical, I guess. This is kind of intense cover. The UK one's a little brighter and poppier, but they're both really cool. I love them both equally. But yeah, so it'll be out September 30th worldwide.
Perfect. And everybody, of course, I'm going to put the link down below so you guys can give that a click. Get right on over there and find out what Rose is all about and what's going on in that retirement home. And of course, if you guys enjoyed the video too, please do hit like. It takes a second. It's free. And it not only helps out this channel, but also helps out other readers like us too, so that they can get amazing authors like Philip drawn to their viewing and recommendations so that people can get a chance to check out Philip's work now and in the future as well. So thanks for doing that, guys. And again, thanks so much for coming on here and doing that, giving us a teaser sample. That was fantastic. I really appreciate that, man.
Of course.
And if we can leave off one thing, what should folks expect the most to come away from after they read the Autumn Springs Retirement Massacre?
Well, I think everybody's good. I think everybody, readers come away with different things, right? Everyone has their own experience. But if my hope is that that you come away having a great time. That's my hope. My hope is that you have you close the book and you're happy that you read it and you're happy that you spent time there, and that it puts a smile on your face, and you want to turn around and tell your buddy or your loved one what a nice time you had, what an enjoyment the story was. I always want my stories to be my number one priority. We talked about a lot of the themes and different genres and all. My number one priority with all of my books and stories is to be entertaining and for people to have fun and to forget a little bit about the horrors of the real world and to just escape a little bit. And then hopefully by, the more immersed people can be and the more they can connect with the characters and all that good stuff, the more they would enjoy the story. That's the hope.
Perfect. Well, you haven't let us down yet, and something tells me, especially from that sample, that this next one is not going to be an exception. It's going to be an addition to that. So looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And Yeah, thank you everybody for checking this out. We'll see you down there, and feel free to click on that link and get yourself a copy.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick.
You bet. Thank you.